Okay, down to the nitty-gritty of policy, legislation, and reform. I'd just like to quote Jeff on when he said, "A place people want to live is a place people want to invest." I think that we should keep this in mind as we pursue this discussion on policy, legislation, and reform, because we can make it happen. Peter Flesher will be moderating this next presentation of panelists, and Peter is the first executive director of the statewide 44-member Empire State Future Coalition. He started this role in February of 2008. The Empire State Future seeks the economic revitalization of New York's main streets, town centers, and urban areas by advancing the principles of smart growth and land use and development decision-making. In 2010, Empire State Future was a key partner in the successful effort to pass the Smart Growth Public Infrastructure Policy Act, a New York State bill requiring many state entities to align their infrastructure spending with stated smart growth criteria. In 2011, ESF is focused on land banking authority and complete streets legislation, as well as the robust implementation of the Smart Growth Bill. From 2003 to 2007, Peter was the senior vice president at the Empire State Development Corporation's Governor's Island subsidiary. Prior to this, he was a transportation and environmental policy advisor to the New York City Mayor's office. He also served as an assistant commissioner for policy at the New York City Department of Transportation. Prior to his government service, Mr. Flesher worked in strategic planning and private banking at Shearson Lehman American Express. A longtime resident of Manhattan's West Village, he now lives in downtown Albany. Peter?
Thank you for that great introduction, but also thank you to the people here in Binghamton, to Amelia, to Tariq, to Mary, and the people, I'm sure many names that I'm not familiar with, who put on today's great conference. I think really high quality discussion, great involvement, great attendance, and so I'm very pleased to be part of this. And my role for the afternoon is essentially to facilitate the discussion of the gentleman to my right. I just wanted to put a little bit more highlight on what my organization does. Again, we're called Empire State Future. We're a statewide smart growth advocacy coalition. There are 44 organizations statewide, including BRISC here in Binghamton, the Sustainable Communities Group. We focus on economic revitalization, and the emphasis here is not just urban areas. We are just as concerned as town centers and main streets, because anywhere there's greater density, there can be greater economic activity, greater cultural and social life for the community. Last year, we were very involved in helping to pass the Public Infrastructure Policy Act, which is a bill that is now law, and it instructs all state agencies, public authorities, and public corporations. That's all the folks who've got real money. And it tells them to take all of their infrastructure spending and align it with smart growth criteria. Now, that's a really far-ranging bill that affects almost every penny that is in the infrastructure agencies. There is a loophole. A commissioner can say in writing and justify that, well, we're not going to turn away these 3,000 high-paying, high-tech jobs, but we did try to get them to go to downtown Binghamton. We did try to get them to go to downtown Utica. They wouldn't do it. We didn't want them to leave the state, so we're going to say it doesn't meet smart growth criteria, but we're not going to throw it away. We were okay with that. It is a loophole, but it's a loophole in a bill that could have far-reaching significance if it's implemented in a very useful, robust way. We have every reason to think the Cuomo administration will take the bill seriously. The language of all their campaign documents reflected it, not just with good quotes, but really the first 20 pages read like a smart growth philosophy. That's not the end of the line. We're waiting to see clear signs that they're making decisions that we would consider good smart growth decisions to build on and use the law. I think that the heart of it, what this law says is there isn't going to be enough infrastructure money to deal with all the infrastructure needs you already have, not to mention the infrastructure acts you'd like to do to become the new engines of growth. So what you have to do is use this bill to turn down the stuff that you might have done in the past that doesn't have enough of a return to the public on its infrastructure investment. The bill allows you to prioritize. The bill allows you to think through what would be a really good investment in a smart growth sense that addresses economic, energy, environment, and equity concerns all at once, rather than doing it, let's say, the old way, for where the first person to come to the spigot gets the infrastructure spending, spends it in a way that may not have a lot of value to folks, and there's not enough money left at the end of the day for uses that might have a much better return to Binghamton, Broome County, and other parts of the state. So that was a big effort last year. This year, we're working to make sure that the Cuomo administration carefully and usefully implements the bill, but we're also working very closely to help see the Land Bank Act passed, and the Land Bank Act, which is now live in front of the legislature, being considered by the Assembly and the Senate, essentially is an extremely good tool for a city or county to deal with its vacant or abandoned properties. So this is something where I know Assemblywoman Lepardo is a co-sponsor of the bill, that the mayor has been thinking about this bill. There are mayors across the state weighing in. It's an important new tool so that the blight that we've seen in any number of these upstate cities and in Long Island, places like Brookhaven, literally all across the state, that blight is not inevitable. It's not a given. There are other states and other cities, Louisville, Kentucky, Flint, Michigan, places in Ohio, where using land banks, they've been able to repurpose not just a few, not just hundreds, but in the case of Flint, Michigan, thousands of formerly vacant properties are now producing real estate value that's good for the people who live next door, good for the property, good for the community, it's taxable, et cetera. So Land Bank Act is a big priority for us this year, along with the Complete Streets Bill. And I'll mention that we are looking at tax increment financing. We're not fully sure yet of all the issues either way. So those are three for this season. That's enough about Empire State Future. Again, I thank you for the opportunity. My role is to attempt to facilitate three very bright, informed, active, smart growthers to my right. And so we'll start with Paul Byer, who is the director of the Governor's Office for Smart Growth, who played a very key role in making sure the Public Infrastructure Policy Act made it through the legislature last year, was live within the Patterson administration till the point the bill was actually signed, and did a superb job of working with all the government agencies and all the top people in the Patterson administration to make sure that the bill became law. And Paul continues to be at the Department of State, carrying the banner of smart growth across the state agencies and for the state government. So, Paul.
Yep. First, let me say, wow, what a crowd. Great. I counted 125, maybe 150 people. Maybe I'm overcounting. I'm always shocked by that because in the late 90s, mid 90s, when I first started doing this, there were occasions when I showed up to speak and 2 and 3 people attended. In fact, the last time I was here in Binghamton was a beautiful Saturday morning. They were showing a movie on infrastructure, how exciting, at a high school auditorium in the city of Binghamton. I was asked to sit on the panel. As I'm driving down, I must say I had doubts as to the number of people who would show up to such an event on a beautiful Saturday. And lo and behold, I showed up, and it was quite a crowd. I came to the conclusion that, number one, they didn't all come out to see me. But number two, that the primary reason they came out, and the primary reason we have such a large, enthusiastic crowd today, is that you've built a culture of smart growth and sustainability here. And you should always stop amidst all of your frustrations with smart growth and sustainability advocacy and give yourselves a pat on the back, because that's a strong culture. There are folks here in the room that have led the charge. Assemblywoman Lepardo, every time I see her, inquires about the state of smart growth and sustainability. Your mayor and his fabulous staff leading the effort, and all the people involved with this conference. Congratulations. It's not easy to build that type of a culture, especially around issues that are difficult to communicate and understand, like land use planning and transportation. For that reason and others, I think I'll echo the words of former Governor Paris Glendening, who coined the phrase smart growth in 1996. He said, "Paul, the wind is at our backs. The wind is at our backs now." And I think that's true. I think we finally have momentum. We have public awareness around issues that were not on people's radar screen 5, 10 years ago, in some cases not even 2 or 3 years ago. I think the wind is at our back for a number of reasons. I, as an employee of the state of New York, am inspired by the passage of the Public Infrastructure Act, Smart Growth Public Infrastructure Policy Act, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. Not only are we advocating for smart growth now because it's the right thing to do, but for once in some of our long careers of advocating for smart growth, we have the law behind us, and that's a big wind at our backs. We also have a new governor who is serious about enforcing this law to the point where he put a large section on the Infrastructure Act in his campaign documents, and not only has he put that down in words, but he has backed it up with actions going back to his days as HUD secretary, where back in the 90s, he was one of very few public officials that took smart growth seriously and actually incorporated it into the functioning of state government. In many ways, that was the prototype, the genesis of what we're seeing in the federal government right now with President Obama's Sustainable Communities Partnership. So yes, I think the wind is at our backs. And my job, probably more than half of my job, is to ensure that now that we have passed landmark smart growth legislation, that it is enforced and implemented effectively, so that, as Peter said, we don't scare away jobs, we don't get portrayed as no growth advocates, but that we in fact induce jobs and attract people to our communities because of smart infrastructure and land use planning policies. It's growth inducement here in areas like Binghamton and other upstate areas. It's not growth management, it's growth inducement. How do we use smart growth to manage our money better and to attract jobs? And I hope that this act ultimately has that effect. In a nutshell, Peter gave a good summary of what the Smart Growth Infrastructure Act is. In a nutshell, it requires state agencies to review all infrastructure projects through the lens of 10 smart growth principles, and we all know those principles, one of which being the classic definition of sustainable development that was handed down by the United Nations. So those are embedded in law now. Excuse me. Those concepts are embedded in law to the extent that we spend taxpayer dollars on infrastructure investments. Now, before I get into the meat of the law, let's take a step back. Why infrastructure? Why, with a smart growth bill, did we focus exclusively on infrastructure? And here's why. For a long time, there's been a debate, that's sort of a chicken and an egg debate, where some people say, well, don't infrastructure investments and transportation investments induce certain land use outcomes? And on the other side, folks say, no, it's the demand and the building of those land uses that induces certain transportation and infrastructure investments. And the answer to both of those questions is you're right. They play off of each other. There's an intricate connection between land use planning and infrastructure investments. Jeff just gave a great, wherever he is, there, gave a great primer on that connection. Now, it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? I mean, is there anybody here that doesn't think land use and infrastructure intersect with each other? Makes a lot of sense. American Planning Association, in one of their publications, made a pretty definitive statement. No single force has had a greater impact on the pattern of land development in American cities in this century, 20th century, than highways. The great Senator Patrick Moynihan, who was also a great urban historian, said highways determine land use, which is another way of saying they settle the future of areas in which they are built. If that's the case, then we should be planning infrastructure and land use together, but we don't. We don't for a number of reasons. We've acted in silos. Transportation experts are concerned about transportation and land use experts are concerned about land use. The way our system of government is set up, most transportation decisions are made at a different level of government than local home rule, which determines our land use patterns. And despite some pretty heroic efforts to try to bring the two together, we haven't gotten there yet. We haven't linked transportation and land use planning. I believe that this act does that. It doesn't mandate any type of land use, because we can't do that on the state level. But what we can do is control the purse strings, and that may provide the carrot and the little stick, maybe a little twig, to get municipalities and the private sector to incorporate smart growth into their projects before we actually have to review them and potentially deny them. So this bill makes that very important link between land use and transportation that I don't see anywhere else in law. And that's very important. That's the policy backdrop to this. It's also one of the few things we can do on the state level to impact land use. We provide a lot of, at the Department of State, we provide a lot of assistance to promote land use planning, smart growth and land use planning on the local level, but that doesn't always result in the linking of transportation and land use decisions. As an example, I used to be on a planning board up in the upstate town of Amherst, New York, and I remember it was about 2000, 2001, we redid our comprehensive plan, and it was a beautiful plan, a lot of outreach, reflected most of the principles of smart growth, and it was incorporated into our zoning code. But then I looked at our capital infrastructure plan for that year. Okay, so the land use plan said concentrate your investments in your building in the village, in the downtown, right? The capital plan said move your historic town hall out of the downtown to the fringe of the town, and move the senior center out of the downtown to the fringe of the town. That's a good example, firsthand example of where I saw that we don't link land use and transportation all that well. So with that in mind, we passed the Public Infrastructure Act, which sets forth 10 smart growth principles that need to be adhered to in our infrastructure investments. Next slide, please. Rather than treating them as 10 separate principles, I tried to break them down into two broad categories, the where and the how of smart growth. And I'm going to borrow from New Jersey Future, which is an organization like Peter Fleischer's in New Jersey. I think it's one of the best definitions of smart growth at the bottom up here, because it focuses on those two important principles. How do you know smart growth when you see it? Smart growth has two primary features, the where and the how. It happens where development can be accommodated with minimal adverse impact to the environment, and in places where development takes maximum advantage of public investments. Smart growth also addresses how the finished development will work with neighboring development to restore choices that are missing in places marked by sprawl. So with that in mind, let's start with the criteria that relate almost exclusively to location. And it's about 30 to 40% of the criteria relate to location, as you can imagine why. The first three criteria, first criteria under the where category can be called the fix it first policy, and that's what Jeff talked about earlier. Basically, we want to invest in repair and maintenance of existing infrastructure, because if we keep building new, we're going to be inducing sprawl probably. So that's a fix it first policy. Some states have specific laws on fix it first. This happens to be embedded in our Infrastructure Act. The second piece of the bill we spent a lot of time on, defining municipal centers and rewarding projects that revitalize municipal centers. Obviously very important to this conference today. Without reading the entire definition, I took one piece out, areas of concentrated and mixed land uses that serve as centers for various activities, but we also gave specific examples of where you already see smart growth in municipal centers. Transit-oriented development around rail or bus rapid transit, that fits the criteria of smart growth planning principles. Hardship areas, low-income areas, environmental justice areas. At the Department of State, we plan local waterfront revitalization areas. We want to reward those. If we put money into planning these communities correctly, we want to reward them with infrastructure investments. And also central business districts and areas around municipal centers that actually feed into those centers. And the third location criteria are developed areas and infill. As you can see already, there's a lot of overlap among these provisions, but we talk about brownfield opportunity areas, infill areas, places targeted for redevelopment in municipal plans. So that's the where of smart growth. Next slide, please. Now we get into the how. Well, the next criteria number 4, deal with neighborhood design and planning. You know these already. This is the simple list of the planning principles that strike at the core of smart growth. Mixed uses, compact communities, higher density, downtown revitalization, brownfields redevelopment, a big thing, accessible and well-maintained public spaces. The last one, age and income diversity. Equity is a huge part of smart growth, of course, but we also fit age-friendly communities into that category too. With the population trends that Jeff talked about earlier, we have to build for an aging community. Smart growth satisfies that demographic. Next slide is mobility choices. You've heard a lot about that already. We simply want to reduce auto dependence. A project, an infrastructure project, should induce land uses that are walkable, bikeable, and transit-friendly, and they should in and of themselves be planned to be walkable, bikeable, and transit-friendly. All right, here's something to think about. I'm always asked about this law in regards to the state's, what's called SEQR, the State Environmental Quality Review Act. It's what all development has to go through before it's approved by a local municipal body. And they say to me, well, isn't this provision, isn't this part the same as SEQR? It really is not. Here's why. You'll see some words up here that relate directly to things that are already reviewed in the development process under SEQR. Agricultural land, soil, surface and groundwater, air quality, historic resources. They are all reviewed under the SEQR Act, but let me tell you something, sitting on a town planning board for 5 years, they don't reflect smart growth principles. There's a lot of sprawl that makes it through SEQR. That is not smart growth. And here's why. Here's the distinction I make. SEQR represents minimization. You're minimizing adverse environmental impacts, right? Smart growth I see as optimization. You're going beyond SEQR. You're going beyond traditional environmental protection to actually enhance the environment through natural water functions. I was told not to use the word hydrologic too much. Green infrastructure would be examples, internal circulation systems within pervious internal transportation systems that manage water. Those sorts of things actually enhance the land that you're developing on. So there is a big distinction there, I think. Hope the courts will back me up. The next slide, very, very important. If you think about, when I think back, the beginnings of the smart growth movement may have started in 2 areas, the movement for walkable communities and the movement for community-based planning. Community-based planning is a system of planning that does extensive, inclusive outreach. It's mainstream now, but 10, 15 years ago, it wasn't. When comprehensive plans were developed, they were done with the minimal attention to public outreach, hearings, things like that, maybe mailings if you were lucky. Now, community-based planning is a very sophisticated science that does as much outreach up front so that in the end you have community buy-in into a project. And in one of the criteria in the Smart Growth Act actually says the project should be a result of community-based planning and intermunicipal planning. Regional planning, another big component of smart growth. And there's a piece later in the bill that I love, and I could thank Assembly Member Sam Hoyt for putting this in. He was the sponsor, the primary sponsor in the Assembly. Assemblywoman Lepardo was a co-sponsor on the bill. The bill says that you must solicit input from and consult with various representatives of affected communities and organizations. Now, I've gotten this question from a lot of agencies. What does that mean? Haven't we already done outreach if we've done seeker? Haven't we already solicited input? And my response is, well, now, if you have, you've got to do it again. This requires state agencies to actually reach out to affected communities and ask for their input on a project. Now, it doesn't say that they have to take that input, right? But the mere act of doing the solicitation, I think, is a step in the right direction. So we're doing some training internally in state agencies on exactly what we mean by that, making a distinction between your traditional form of outreach and what we know of community outreach now. That's the process part of this. And now we get to the overarching, next slide, thank you, principle of sustainability. This bill actually has the definition of sustainable development in it. Development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now again, I get state agency lawyers looking at me and saying, how the heck do I implement that? I don't know with precision right now, but we're working through it, and it's certainly a concept that we should all be used to at this point. Green buildings are sustainable development. Downtown revitalization is sustainable. So we're working with agencies now to lay out all the possibilities, the fiscal sustainability, economic sustainability, as well as the social and environmental sustainability behind the project. This, to me, is one of the more exciting pieces of the bill because it is an overarching concept that really should infiltrate into so many different areas of state government, the idea of sustainability, planning now for the future. Simple concept, but in the past we have strayed from that concept. I'm inspired by some of the comments and some of the support that we are getting from the federal government for this type of thing, for this type of law. I think the timing of this law is perfect because at the same time we have a president who is promoting sustainable communities on an interagency basis through the smart growth, through the Sustainable Communities Partnership. And Ray LaHood, this is a US DOT commissioner now, I'm going to quote, on livability and on the connection between land use and transportation, said, once politicians begin to listen to their constituents, they will realize a sustainable course is what voters want. I think that's true. They will find constituents way ahead on livability and sustainability, on having cleaner, greener communities, on having walking and biking paths, and on having streetcar systems. That quote from an interview with Grist magazine. It's good to hear that sort of thing coming from the federal government because then we know we have support here in New York for what we have already done through the Smart Growth Public Infrastructure Act. And my last slide will be just a brief overview of the process that was established in the law to implement it. And this is very interesting. When I first got this job as Smart Growth Director, one of my dreams, and this was a pie-in-the-sky dream, was that every state agency would have a Smart Growth Director or a planner who would make sure that that agency is thinking in terms of land use planning and smart growth in their operations. I think we got something better than that in this law. Every infrastructure agency, every agency that invests in infrastructure must set up a Smart Growth Advisory Committee. And I'm encouraging the agencies to set up interdisciplinary advisory committees so that they're sharing information across disciplinary lines. Planners are talking to environmentalists who are talking to engineers and making these final decisions because those are the entities that have to do what are called smart growth impact statements. These entities have to make sure, to the extent practicable, and that's the loophole that Peter alluded to earlier. There's a practicability standard here in the law. To the extent practicable, these interdisciplinary agency groups have to review these projects through the smart growth lens. I think that's tremendously important, that you have a body built into every state agency, almost like a smart growth cabinet, reviewing spending and other policies. Beyond that, we are also interacting across agency lines. I have a very active and vocal group of state agency representatives that now includes lawyers. We really didn't have lawyers involved in this until the law passed, and that makes sense. So we're enculturating and educating a whole new group of professionals in state government, and we interact with one another because we're trying to provide some type of uniformity across state agencies and ensure that there's communication across state agencies so we don't fall back into that trap of viewing these decisions in silos, in narrow terms. So what do I think this law will do, or what do I hope it does? I mean, that was a kind of a dry overview of what the law is and how we implement it, but to me as a lawyer, I always think that the law is a living, breathing document. It was a product of a history, a social and political history, and it should yield social and political results. At the very least, this bill will be a thought changer, and already has been. Agencies that didn't think about land use outcomes in infrastructure policies now have to do that. There's no question about that. I think it's a behavior changer, especially in state agencies who now have to make decisions about money, not just review them, but make final decisions based on smart growth. So it's definitely a thought changer. It's definitely a behavior changer. What it really should be in the end is a game changer. And the only way that's going to happen is if municipalities and developers and the business community and local advocates like you build these principles into your operations, build them into your projects and your land use zonings early on so that you don't have to come in at the back end and wonder why your project was denied by a DOT or an Empire State Development. If this bill changes land use patterns on the local level, and land use planning and zoning on the local level, then it will have reached its potential. And that's what we have to strive for. Again, there's no mandate on local governments, but we will be doing outreach, and I have been doing outreach all over the state, encouraging localities to work with the state to try to get in ahead of the game and actually change their land use planning and practices. I solicit your help, I solicit your input in that monumental task. This is not easy. I find now that advocacy is much easier than enforcement. But in this process, I think we'll come out a lot stronger. We'll have a lot more buy-in to smart growth if we get in early and make this new law a behavior changer. And I look forward to doing that with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. It's always a pleasure to be the advocate introducing and following the person working for the administration, but in this case, we have a true believer in smart growth on the inside, and that's a very good thing. Water and sewer infrastructure is a very important part of the game as well. If highways are a key part of how land use patterns develop, so are extension of water lines and the extension of sewer lines. So is the management of our sewage treatment plants and sewers, and so is the availability of waterways as recreation, as waterways for fishing or for just attractive places to be near, linked to having proper sewer and clean water infrastructure. So Matt Millay is someone that I first met back 6-7 years ago when we were both doing something very bipartisan, working for a Republican executive at the time, and since then we both worked for Democratic executives in our government service. Matt directed environmental programs under Governor Pataki. He went on to run or executive director of the Environmental Facilities Corporation under in the last administration. As you all know, I'm sure, he's now in the county running all of the physical services for the county, extending the role of making sure that our infrastructure, including the water and sewer infrastructure that Matt was key on at EFC, is serving the community in all the various ways that it could. So I want to introduce Matt and thank you.
Thank you, Peter. It's always good to see you. We first met when Peter was tasked with a significant challenge on a large parcel of property that Governor Pataki bought for $1 out of his own pocket, which was Governor's Island, which was a major coup at the time, but turned out to be a major bureaucratic headache also. I think the challenges there were significant, but now I know that I believe New York City's now taken over complete ownership of the facility, but that was where Peter and I first met, and we've enjoyed working with one another on important issues like state parks and now smart growth. And when I was with the Environmental Facilities Corporation, I had the opportunity to serve under Paul in the smart growth cabinet. So now I've shifted, and we heard a lot from Paul moments ago about what the state wants communities to do and how we want to drive communities to better thinking. And I used to be a part of that macro big picture process, and now I'm more of a practitioner. And just last year, about a year ago, I had an opportunity that came out of really not expecting it, but I had worked for the Environmental Facilities Corporation for close to 4 years. I was the acting president for 2 years, and I'd worked on implementing the federal stimulus program, where I'd helped many communities think differently about infrastructure. The federal stimulus program was a great opportunity to ask that question of communities, because it gave us grants in the wastewater sector for the first time in almost 20 years. And we had an opportunity to say to communities, how can you do this better? How can you do it differently? And Onondaga County was one of those communities that wanted to do it differently, wanted to do it better, benefited from a stimulus grant. And shortly after that, I was offered a position with Onondaga County Executive Joni Mahoney, and that's where I work today, and I'm having a great time. And to Paul's point, I also have a remarkable portfolio. I have 9 departments that report to me in the position of Deputy County Executive. And that's why I was very excited to take the position with the County Executive, because it gave me the opportunity to really embrace all of what we just heard about, because I have the Department of Transportation, drinking water, wastewater, planning, facilities. I lose track of all of them. I have 9. And the Office of the Environment are the key ones. I have some public safety ones as well, but I really hit the jackpot of having the entire toolkit working under me in this responsible way of having all of these department heads now that I can try to synthesize on some of these principles. So it's very exciting. And even better than that, I have a boss who says, have at it. Take some chances. Try some things. She didn't run for office to do things the way they've always been done, which is all I need to know, because we can run with it, and we have some great leadership to do that. And I know you heard from Megan before, who's part of our team in trying to help change that paradigm in government. And I'm very happy to be here today, because I think it's important to not just sit in our community and think about what we're doing and keep it to ourselves. We need to get out and talk about it and dialogue with folks, particularly in our neighboring communities on a regional basis. And I'm really thrilled to be in Binghamton today. I didn't bring a PowerPoint. I figured by 2:45 in the afternoon to be PowerPointed out. And one of my former bosses, Judith Enck, had a great line where she said, "Power corrupts, but PowerPoint corrupts absolutely." So I will save you from a PowerPoint. I think Megan shared one of our PowerPoints earlier. And one of the programs I'm going to speak about today is our Save the Rain program. And if you're interested in learning more about that in detail, I have a LinkedIn page where you can find an updated Save the Rain presentation and also our Save the Rain website. But what I was asked to talk about today was an overview of our efforts. I know Megan talked about our planning efforts, so I won't get into that too much. Our challenges, how can smart growth and sustainability improve our fiscal health, which is obviously a priority. Why are the priorities that we have our priorities, and what can we learn from one another? One of the challenges that we're facing in Onondaga County, and I'm sure in Broome County as well, and as many others, is home rule. You've probably heard about that a lot today, so I won't dwell too much on it. We have 19 towns and 15 villages, and every single one of them knows exactly what they need to be doing to make sure that their community prospers, and they know exactly how much money I need to give them to do that. And other than that, they would just prefer I leave them alone. So that's one of our challenges. And another challenge we face in particular in Onondaga County, and I'm not sure if this rings true in Broome County, but one of our key components of the infrastructure issue that Paul spoke about, drinking water, is not necessarily under the control of the county. We have an Onondaga County Water Authority, which for whatever reason, and this goes back to a decision made in the 1960s, was created as a public benefit corporation that the county executive has zero oversight of. We have no board appointments. We have no ex officio members on it. The board operates completely outside of the auspices of the executive branch of Onondaga County government, and the board of directors is appointed by the Onondaga County legislature. So it's an important part of the equation where we maintain a friendly relationship, but certainly not one of oversight and discussion, and that's come up quite a bit in the planning process about how the drinking water infrastructure drives development trends. Planning decisions are also easily overruled. Megan and her colleagues in the Onondaga County Planning Agency provide great insight to communities on how they can think smarter about their infrastructure, how they can avoid making decisions which lead to costly needs down the road, and with a simple majority of a planning board, those suggestions can be overruled. Definitely a huge challenge. We've had successes, though. My boss took a very brave step. This was before I joined the administration, and one of the things that attracted me to the administration, because it took a lot of courage to suggest that we could do things differently with regard to our sales tax revenue. Some counties share sales tax with communities, some counties don't. Onondaga County historically had shared its sales tax revenue with suburban communities, and those suburban communities often, whether through political pressure or just historic precedent, utilized that sales tax revenue, not necessarily on a cash basis, but they would take the sales tax revenue from the county and use it to lower the county tax levy on an annual basis. So it was a weird fiscal kind of creativity where the sales tax revenues were creating an artificially low tax burden on a local government that chose to do that, and we were starving the city of Syracuse of revenues that were generated within that city, which was generally the economic hub of the region. So the county executive decided that we needed to change course, and the political landscape permitted her to do that because she had support in the state Senate with Senator Dave Valesky and the mayor of Syracuse, who we have a very good working relationship with, where they decided that it was time to change this historic precedent and stop denying the city of Syracuse the sales tax revenue that's generated from the additional 1% that's charged on an annual basis. And a huge fight ensued. Significant fight. It was a significant paradigm shift, and the county executive's position was that as the heart of our community, it really is the heart of our community, we have a very atypical urban center, suburban donut hole, ex-urban even wider, spreading out even more with the growth of highways. But the sales tax fight that she took on was that without the core being well-funded, the outer ring will start to decline even more precipitously than it has. And she took that brave fight to the legislature, and there was a lot of pushback, a lot of hemming and hawing about how this could not work, how we've always done it a certain way and we need to keep doing it a certain way. And unfortunately, the politics of the situation allowed it to happen that way because the suburban caucus controls the county legislature. And yes, they're Republicans, but they refer to themselves as the suburban caucus, and the city caucus did not have the votes to supersede any of their decisions on this. But ultimately, the case was made that Syracuse University, the multiple hospitals that are in our community, Lemoyne, Onondaga County Community College, the EDS and MEDS, as it's called, are really now the new backbone of our economy, and that we need to support those institutions which are in our urban core. And the only way to do that is to provide the resources that are needed to the city of Syracuse, which is at its debt limit and also at its constitutional tax limit. The only way to ensure that the city of Syracuse didn't go into bankruptcy and under the control of an oversight panel controlled by the state was to provide this sales tax resource. And the mayor had a very powerful option in her back pocket, with Dave Valesky being in the majority at the time, which was to use what they called the nuclear option of having the legislature pass a special legislation which would provide direct sales tax revenue to the city of Syracuse rather than Onondaga County. So the stars kind of aligned for this agreement, which now, back to the smart growth issue, is raising lots of great questions at the local level, because one of the arguments the county executive made was, after we do this, not only is it good for Syracuse, but it's good for our communities that rely, particularly villages, that rely on this revenue annually to backstop their budgets. They don't have to make the hard decisions that counties and school districts have to make that are losing revenues. And if you give them $1, they spend $1. But if you're taking the revenues away, it's going to force a new dialogue. And it's going to force a new dialogue about efficiencies. It's going to force a new dialogue about consolidation. It's going to force a new dialogue about how we can move away from doing things the way we've always done them and move towards working with the new normal, which I think we all agree is less resources from the state, less resources from the federal government, increasing infrastructure costs from deferred maintenance, and more pressure from our residents to cut taxes. So the sales tax agreement was very risky, very courageous, I think. The legislature ended up supporting it unanimously. And it's led to a lot of consternation, ongoing dialogue, but it's starting to force that discussion that the mayor and the county executive suggested would happen. We're starting to have communities call us and say, can we consolidate our purchasing? Because we might want to do that now. Can we talk about how we can potentially be more efficient with our snow plowing, which costs our community many, many millions of dollars, because wonderfully for me, I moved to the snow capital of the universe. My wife is thrilled. And those questions are coming up in a very proactive way. And then now it leads to our development plan, which you heard about too, which is we need to be smarter, as Paul mentioned, we need to be smarter about the investments we're making. We had a very, I think, positive outcome with the last census showing that our decline as a population has steadied. We didn't lose population, we didn't grow necessarily. I think we had a little bit of growth. But on the whole, our community has stopped the decline, and now we hope to bend that curve back towards growth. And we think that the sales tax sharing plan in its new form provides the resources that we need to keep the city solvent. It provides resources to the county, so the county can continue to provide its services on a global basis to all of the communities in the county. And it allows us to have a dialogue with the villages and the towns and see what we can do to work together to create efficiencies at that level as well. One of the other big successes that we've had at the county level is infrastructure being very important. One of the other monumental moves that the county executive made was to move away from a strategy on dealing with our combined sewer overflows issues, and this speaks to the water, wastewater issues that I worked very much on at the Environmental Facilities Corporation, was to move away from a federal court order which required us to build 4 wastewater treatment plants right in the city of Syracuse and shift to a more balanced approach of using gray and green infrastructure. And this is the first time in the process of putting green infrastructure out there that the federal courts have permitted, not only permitted, but required the use of green infrastructure as part of complying with the CSO abatement program. We have to capture 95% of our CSO runoff by 2018, using about 6% of that capture through the use of green infrastructure, which will be about 250 million gallons per year. We'll invest about $78 million over the next 8 years in green infrastructure applications in the city of Syracuse. And at the same time, we're building 2 rather large, rather expensive gray infrastructure stormwater storage systems, but they're not regional treatment facilities that store wastewater and treat it with chlorine and dump it into Onondaga Creek or Onondaga Lake. And we're working also to green those structures. And this was a huge victory, though, because with smart growth, with asking people to think about reinvesting in their urban areas and moving into urban areas, it's disadvantageous to build a wastewater treatment plant 100 yards away from your commercial core. And that's exactly what we were poised to do in 2008 when the county executive took office, and she had 4 days to decide if she was going to award the construction contracts to build a wastewater treatment facility right outside of Armory Square, which you've been to Syracuse, is where we've worked for decades to create a entertainment core in the city of Syracuse. And the county thought it was just a great idea. Not necessarily, it was the engineers that said that's where we had to build it, but through engineering genius, we were going to build a wastewater treatment facility right next to our entertainment district. That's no longer going to happen. Not only is it no longer going to happen, we're investing this $70 million in green infrastructure, which is a very smart growth driven philosophy because it talks about treating water and wastewater in a way using natural systems, using simple approaches to managing stormwater, using bioswales and green roofs. We're going to build one of the largest green roofs in the Northeast starting next week, 66,000 square feet on top of our convention center, which will capture 1 million gallons of rainfall annually. We're building a water reuse system at our War Memorial Hockey Rink, which will capture rainwater off of that. We'll use it to make the ice for the hockey team. It's the first professional hockey team in the nation, we think, that'll play on rainwater. And those are just some of the exciting projects we're doing to get people excited about it. But they're also going to see their streets are going to be more attractive. We're going to be building bike lanes along with bioswales. And what's been really exciting is as we push this out into the community, and EPA came to us recently and made us one of their top 10 partners in the nation on green infrastructure. My DOT commissioner came to me and he said, I got 3 minutes. It's a good story though. My DOT commissioner came to me and he said, we've been looking at the Route 5 corridor, which goes out westward out of the city of Syracuse towards Skinny Atlas, right by what's called West Genesee High School. And he said, we've been thinking about this, and what would you think if we did porous sidewalks on the corridor? And it was a eureka moment. I'm like, they're getting it. It's sinking in. And I said, yes, that's fantastic. And then he proposed it to the town, and they said, we don't want sidewalks in there, because you know that little strip of space between the sidewalk and the road? Who's going to mow that? We don't have people to mow that. We don't want your porous sidewalks. So that's the dialogue that you get at the local level. So at the state level, it's fun because you can say, we really think you should be doing this, and now I'm really a little closer to the ground, but still fighting those challenges. And there's a way to attack that. And the other fun part of that was they're expanding the shoulders, and I said, well, can we call those shoulders bike lanes? And the DOT guys looked at me like I had four heads, and they were like, I don't know. Nobody's ever asked us to do that before. I'm like, well, they're wide enough for bikes, aren't they? I guess so. I said, well, we'll call them bike lanes then. So it's fun, though, to be able to have that discussion and have people say, oh, sure, we can do that. And that's an exciting part about being on this wave that we're on. I think that the state's energy for this is making it easier. It's making it easier to go to that town and say, the federal pedestrian checklist showed that this corridor should have a sidewalk. And the state of New York is likely going to give us extra points for funding when we build the sidewalk and bike lanes. And we look forward to working with you using our green infrastructure program to mitigate stormwater along this corridor, which will help you with your stormwater permit, which is now becoming much more onerous. So it's an exciting time to be advancing some of these things. The dollars are limited. We're very fortunate in Onondaga County to have the resources that we need to do the green infrastructure program in the city. Very soon we'll have a green infrastructure program in the suburbs that's not court order driven. And I think my time is up, but I think I'll be here for the next panel to answer any questions. And thank you for having me. And this is a great discussion.
All right, this has been a long day, but I feel good. I'm completely jazzed by the discussion today. The B Senators are going to the Calder Cup Finals. I'm wearing my one Saul Stern tie. And the planning committee for this event was brave enough to trust me as the role of facilitator, the mad emailer from City Hall facilitating the final discussion. So those of you from outside the area, that's an inside joke, sorry. Before we get to some of the questions, I just want to touch on a couple items here. Is that this was done primarily by committee, by consensus. There was an incredible amount of work that went into this from some really committed folks that have been doing this work for quite some time. I just want to read their names very quickly. Mark Bowers and Zach McKenna from DOT. Marissa Lamphere, maybe if we can hold and give them all applause at the end. Marissa Lamphere and Mary McFadden from the Department of Health, the county. Eric Jensen from WSKG. Jane DeHawkers from the community and former past. Tom Evans from Southern Tier East Regional Planning Development Board. Dave Curry, who helped in initial stages from Brisk. And of course, Caroline and Amelia LaDolce from the city. So just amazing group to work with. So I basically had no choice because it was my job to do this. I don't know if you've met my boss, our mayor. We don't say he has a temper, we just say he has very impassioned, persuasive skills. That's the way we call it. So about a year ago, the city finished a year-long commission report, and there are 4 commissions actually. One was the Commission on Sustainable Development, Smart Growth. Some folks in this room who have actually continued work through the Alliance were instrumental in that. And it was deliberations for over a year, and they put together an incredible recommendation package. And one of them was on land use, initiate and encourage discussion at a regional level on adoption of smart growth and sustainable development principles. So when I took over the department, the mayor pulled me in his office and he handed me this. He said, okay, I think you're busy for the next few years. You know, this was the kind of the work that we're doing and why the city has played a role in this effort. But it's been easy because there's so much great work going on. I think one of the things I did want to mention is that if you look at where we are and where we're going, and we'll be able to address some of the panelists, we have some of the same problems that Onondaga mentioned. You could have pulled out Onondaga, put in Broome County, taken out Syracuse, and put in Binghamton. It would have been exactly the same. But there's a lot of reason, I think, to remain positive. If you look at some of our planning efforts at a regional level, the Binghamton Metropolitan Transportation Study, which has shown excellent leadership on this, has made investing in urban core a priority in 2005. They expanded this, recognizing that our village centers are also instrumental and an important way that we can be consistent with smart growth. There's the Greenway Plan, a major recreational asset along our waterway corridors that cross county jurisdictions. There's the Southern Tier East Regional Planning Development Board and the Southern Tier Central Regional Planning Development Board that's working right now on a Susquehanna-Chemung Action Plan. So a lot of collaboration, a lot of regionalism. You look at the county. In the agricultural plan in 2001, it mentioned smart growth, protect our farmland. In 2002, the BC plan, it mentioned smart growth, ways to incentivize and restore economic vitality to our region. 2006, Aging Future Partnerships came up with a BC Livability Plan. This isn't new to our region. We have all the resources. We have, I think, all the assets. What we need to do is just integrate this efforts at a truly regional level and find out ways that we can then translate that into policy and reform, similar to the incredible leadership we see up at Onondaga County. Very impressive. So I'm going to throw these questions out here. Some of them are directed specifically to folks. Others aren't. As you know, New York State is rated as one of the most business-unfriendly states in the country. Has the implementation of smart growth development been more successful in more business-friendly states? And I see some other variations of this. Just how does this apply? It's almost as if we have to figure out how to do smart decline. If anyone could speak to that.
Well, I'll start from an advocacy point of view. Even the smart growth law that Paul went into some detail in describing is not new regulation. Essentially, it's very clear instructions to state agencies to really think through carefully how they're spending the public's money so that the public gets the highest return on its investment. I can't think of any better expression from a business point of view. Use your tax money wisely, get a good return.
Okay.
I also think that, at least certainly the development sector, what they really crave is certainty and predictability. And so to the degree that localities or the state can send clear signals about this is what we want, and we are making the investments to make that viable, and we are going to try to smooth the way for you to follow along when you're trying to come with us. That I think is entirely business friendly. I mean, it is really a proactive attempt to get a better partnership and better alignment between the public and private sector. And that means not only sort of looking at your infrastructure investments, but then also looking at your rules and codes. I mean, I can't tell you the number of counties and cities I've gone to where they say, we want smart growth, and then you look in their zoning and it's all single use, or it's all strip development for business along the arterial, and you sort of wonder why, if you want it so much, why it's so illegal. So I think there are a couple places that we need to be looking in making it business friendly, but I think that should be, when the community can express this is the direction we want to go for quality of life, for job creation, for economic development, and we're going to put our money where our mouth is, make it easier for the private sector to follow you.
I have a follow-up to that then. You mentioned that a lot of the development that would be consistent with smart growth is illegal. And I remember at the Smart Growth Conference, one developer said, I'm tired of breaking the law. Obviously, there are form-based codes that would allow for smart growth or promote and incentivize smart growth development. But changing a municipal zoning code is a huge challenge. Does anyone have examples of maybe a community that went through that process and how it was successful? Because both in the city's commission plan, as well as the draft Susquehanna and Chemung action plan, they specifically mention that as a target, a 5-year goal, get one community to move their zoning code to a form-based code. So does anyone have maybe best practices example?
We haven't gotten that far yet, but we're on the path. And let me just speak to the Stormwater Program, and I'll turn it over to Megan because she probably knows more about it than I do. But what we've run into with the Green Infrastructure Program in the city is that, similar to what we just heard, is that everybody's for it until they're not. And they're not when the code says, oh, you can't do porous pavement sidewalks in the city of Syracuse because the ordinance doesn't allow it. And one of the challenges we face is that the city, we are working in close partnership with them, and they've been tremendous, but we were told at the outset that zoning was off limits. So we're working on a stormwater ordinance right now, but we have not had success on zoning. I think we will ultimately, because some of the absurdity of the zoning is very apparent to us. When somebody wants to invest in a building in one of our lowest median household income census tracts and put a restaurant in, and they're told by the city that they have to build a 24-space parking lot next door, and we don't have the stormwater ordinance passed yet, so they can do it. They can do an impervious parking lot. They just need to build it, even though there's plenty of on-street parking because nobody really goes to that community. But that's the rules. The roadblocks are much more acute and apparent, and we can address them because now we know that was a problem. We got a variance for that individual, and we're starting to have some success, but zoning is still off limits.
Yeah, we actually tried back in 2001. We brought in Andreas Dewani, who was at the forefront of the new urbanist neo-traditional development form-based code movement. And he came in and he laid out a regional planning framework for communities. He laid out a model ordinance to do form-based codes. He laid out all of those principles ingrained in form-based codes to try and introduce our communities to that. And we tried to roll that out to communities, and it was extremely difficult. It was way too big of an endeavor for these communities to really understand and embrace and be able to make that wholesale change from one to the other. We've had a couple communities that have really grabbed on. We have a lakefront development area in the city of Syracuse who has adopted the form-based code. They're actually using that transect developed within the settlement plan and from the form-based code, and it's working somewhat well. It's a transitional area, so there's some tweaks that need to be made to it. But if you want to talk about how we put that into place and how that's going and what some of the issues are, I'd be happy to talk to anybody about that. Some of our hamlets, Hamlet of Brewerton up in the town of Cicero, just worked with a consultant to put form-based codes into place for its redevelopment area. But for the most part, we've actually been working with communities, and communities have been putting into place pieces of it, taking the principles and applying those within their existing framework, whether it's using an overlay district, whether it's easing up on their parking requirements, whether it's getting rid of setback requirements. So sort of nickel and diming away at some of the real major issues in their codes instead of that wholesale change. But we're getting there. We're trying. Just to speak, to the developers and the predictability issue. We actually met with a couple developers in the city of Syracuse. They were wondering how they could improve their codes, and we met with developers and said, okay, which codes in Onondaga County do you actually prefer over another? Which ones do you like? And they chose the more prescriptive, the more restrictive codes in our community because they knew exactly what they were expected to do, and it made their jobs a lot easier, and we thought that was really interesting.
I was just going to say the same thing about using overlays as a tool so that you don't have to do the entire city or town or whatever. And we've seen some. I'm actually from Peoria, Illinois originally, and DPZ went and did an entire sort of comprehensive master plan for the downtown there, which was great because it set a framework, like you said, and set a vision for making some pretty significant changes there. But then afterwards, they identified, other people came in. Jeff Farrell, who does a lot of form-based code work, went in and did smaller district level planning, right? And I think that's one way to get that done. We're also seeing that in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, we're actually working with the Shaker Village up there, but Pittsfield has done an arts overlay district in their downtown. I don't think it's a form-based code, but it's another example of an overlay. And then one thing going back to the pro-business idea and investment, I was in Oklahoma City last week, and it was like completely surprising how totally interesting it was there to me. And it was completely based on my own ignorance. So, but what I found fascinating there is that this is a city that's over the last like 10 or 12 years has levied a sales tax on themselves to do massive amounts of public infrastructure investment to the tune of like almost $2 billion. And they're on their third round, and they're going to raise like $750 million to do all these sort of pointed sort of specific infrastructure projects, right? So they built a canal. They're doing a huge $180 million streetscape infrastructure improvement project. They're going to put like a trolley in, and so. But what was fascinating was that there was all this investment, but when you actually asked some questions about how they were strategically linked, or how they were going to be leveraged, as far as what do you expect the outcome of these projects to be from an economic and community development standpoint, there was never really an answer, because what was happening there was they're incredibly pro-business there, and they're really good at sort of identifying the project, and then like great engineers sort of focusing down, project managing it. We've got the money, let's build it, let's get it done, let's move on. Our success is that we built it. But they have not developed like a strategic, larger framework for leveraging those investments. And so when you go and ask them about their zoning code, and are you doing things in your ordinance that would help facilitate smart growth in your downtowns, there's sort of like a blank blank, but we're investing all this money. It's like, well, maybe you need to do some of this other stuff too. So it's not just business, pro-business, it's not just public investment, it's also having this the infrastructure in place to attract that kind of development.
Just one more comment on that. I think a lot of places have been very successful when they sort of do a build-out under their current regulations, when they sort of do a theoretical build-out, that a lot of people see that and don't actually like what the plan is, and that is often an impetus for making some change. So that's, I think, the other. And, Doug Foy, who was the kind of Uber secretary for smart growth in Massachusetts, he used to just run around Massachusetts saying, we all love Northampton. We couldn't build Northampton in Northampton again. It's illegal. Northampton is now illegal in Northampton. And that sort of, highly identifiable place that lots of people relate to, and like the notion that you couldn't even do that again when it's so desirable just strikes people as sufficiently absurd that it becomes clear you should do something different.
I'm going to talk on the visioning process. There are a couple questions on that. A transition is that it seems that the planning process and talking more about the outcomes, I know Mark mentions this specifically. Let's talk about the outcomes. We want a healthier public. We want a more cost-effective, government, and continuing along that, and then backpedaling into, well, that if that's what we want, then how do we do that? Well, that's the visioning process. So there's some questions here about, where can municipalities or counties secure funds, given there seems to be fewer and fewer resources that are being passed down. And I thought maybe if, Jeff, you could talk about a little bit more about the Partnership for Sustainable Communities and how that allowed some communities or regions similar to us, where we don't technically have a regional plan that integrates all those functions, but they were able to secure some funds through the new partnership programs.
Yeah, last year HUD had $150 million, and DOT had about $600 million in the Tiger program. The HUD grants were in particular a great impetus for a lot of localities to really form up in their sort of formally join together as a region who hadn't in the past, and go after that money for specific projects that they thought would help them move away from the status quo and do some of the hard thinking that they hadn't been able to do without sort of an infusion of resources to be able to do that. This year, that money was under real threat in the last round of budget discussions And frankly, we did a lot of lobbying on it and sort of made the case that this was exactly the kind of money that communities need to be able to make the, the arguments I made earlier. And so there's $100 million this year. I believe the RFP is going to be coming out relatively soon. And it's, I think that's a great place to look. For specific transportation projects, there is, as I said, a rural set-aside for the $550 million or whatever this year's allotment of Tiger money is out of DOT. And then EPA actually offers technical assistance grants that are at a much lower level, but I think pretty effective as well. So those are three of the places that are readily available, and I think are looking for exactly these kinds of projects. I will say this discussion about whether this is a resource that should be available at the federal level for communities is going to come up again. And it really, the program and the money was saved and put in there because Congress heard from people like you saying, this is a real thing. This isn't just some Washington program. This is communities trying to figure out their future. We need these resources, and they're going to pay back, significantly if you leave them in there. And we're about to have that same fight again because Congress was so far behind on the last budget that we now have to do the next one. So if you are interested in helping with that, please contact me because it really made a big difference to hear from localities who, think this is valuable.
Okay, I was afraid this topic was going to come up, so I'm going to preface it a bit. We're dealing with three global crises. We have an energy crisis, we have an economic crisis, and we have an environmental crisis. And the old adage is think globally, act locally, plan regionally, is the new tagline that's been on to that. And if you think about it, the global economic crisis has manifested itself clearly here in our region. The global energy crisis is manifesting itself both in the dramatic increase in gas cost as well as the prospect of massive industrial activity in the Marcellus Shale, the gas shale drilling. And the environmental crisis has manifested itself in a dramatic redrawing of the flood maps, the 100-year flood maps. In the city of Binghamton, about 15% of our parcels are going to be newly impacted if the draft plans hold. These are parcels all along our riverways where we've invested recreational assets. So dramatic impacts at a regional level. So, with all that being said, I tried to smooth it there a little. What will the future gas drilling in upstate New York mean to smart growth planning? And there were three questions related to that. So that was the simplest. Does anyone want to take that on?
You're recording this, aren't you? This is being recorded, though?
Should we shut off the cameras?
Well, no, it's right here, and I know it's even more of a immediate issue. I know the southern tier in particular is under siege from the gas companies, and we're all awaiting the state's generic environmental impact statement to come out and give us some guidance on where we go from here. And I think that that's been a very healthy process at the state level. And we're looking forward to some guidance from them. But at the same time, talking about this just abstractly with the boss and others is, we have to answer the question of where do we want to be? If we want energy independence, the answer isn't solar and wind, I don't think. That's a personal opinion. I'm not speaking for the administration. I don't think solar and wind is the solution to getting off of foreign oil. Perhaps natural gas is part of that solution if we do it smartly, if we do it differently than they've done it in Pennsylvania. And I'm anxiously awaiting what the DEC's guidance will be on that. I think in Onondaga County, we're going to take steps to ban the disposal of frac fluid until such time that we know what's in it. And then after we know what's in it, we might continue that ban based upon the fact that municipal wastewater treatment systems probably shouldn't treat, not knowing exactly what's in it, though. I can't make that definitive decision. But as I understand in Pennsylvania now, it's not lawful to dispose of frac fluid in municipal systems, and that's probably a good decision. So there's a healthy discussion going on, and it's too bad that it's so polarizing at this point, particularly in New York, because we have a ways to go. I don't think any permits have been issued at this point, and there's probably going to be some time until some are. but we want to be a participant in that discussion, particularly from the aspect of potential economic development, from a smart growth perspective, the investment that can come with it for road improvements, smart road improvements, and also the jobs that come with it are very hard to shy away from, particularly I know in the southern tier where the economic impact has been prolonged. So that's my 2 cents, personally.
Multi-billion-dollar industry, and all we get are 2 cents, huh? Okay.
An investment.
Okay, thank you. I think I'll just bring up, as it has been very polarizing, the discussion, it seems both sides have been trying more to just debunk and delegitimate the other. There seemed to be one consistent, sane voice in that, and it was our Assemblywoman who kept saying, plan. Use the time to plan. And so if anything, I think it speaks again to the importance of regional planning, because this is going to have a dramatic regional impact. One question about, I mentioned this earlier, but just want to hear it specifically. What do the panelists think about planned retreat strategies? So smart decline, similar to what's happening in Gary and Detroit.
I'll comment on that a little bit because it's a very real thing in New York. Buffalo used to have 620,000 people. It's already down to 260,000. So its percentage population loss makes it right up there with Flint, Michigan, and Youngstown, Ohio, and Gary is, the leader in just the wrong thing. Rochester, under then Mayor Duffy, now Lieutenant Governor Duffy, recognized that it had lost 35% of its population, but because of the heavy job losses associated with Kodak, which once had 60,000 jobs in the Rochester area, having gone down to 9,000. Not to mention Xerox and Bosch and Lohm also shrinking dramatically. Rochester has vast industrial properties that are vacant and abandoned, and suggesting of something needs to be done to look at the city's infrastructure. So Mayor Duffy started something called Project Green, where he was systematically analyzing block by block what parts of the town were viable, where you might only have one house still standing and maybe you need to buy that person out or pick up the house and move it to a block where there were enough houses to have a viable block, and at a certain point saying no more infrastructure for that block, or that block becomes a park or an urban farm. Detroit has gone a long way with the planned shrinkage. I think these cities don't want to get too caught up in we're a planned shrinkage community. We're going to be smaller from here on in. They're just saying, let's take the land that has ceased to have value, homes that are really dilapidated, and make some better use of them, even if it doesn't mean a populated place. And let's, for now, be a smaller place, but let's use our land in a better way. And who knows what'll happen later. But I think it's a strategic approach to looking at the communities, in some cases block by block. Detroit's doing it 20 or 30 acres at a time.
I would agree, and IBM's coming to town to work with the city of Syracuse on a vacant lot study, which we're excited to see how IBM can contribute analytically to what our vacant lot situation. It's nowhere near as severe as it is in Buffalo, but that's where I think, and Paul mentioned this, the land banking apparatus will be advantageous to us, and we're looking forward to see that legislation advance at the state level, because we're not planning a retreat necessarily. We do have a vacant lot issue, and that the land bank will be a key component of managing that in a better way.
Anything else? Okay. I think one of the keys there too is not to get caught up on the language. Smart growth, smart decline, it really is capturing the investments in the most strategic way to get the outcomes you want. There's a question, how does a municipality encourage private developers to invest in privately owned, underutilized asphalt? Matt?
Privately owned, underutilized, what?
Asphalt.
Oh, underperforming asphalt, which you missed Ellen's presentation.
Oh, I missed it.
Gray fields, kind of empty commercial strip malls from the 70s.
Oh, this man.
Oh yeah, I meant the developer guy.
I was like, I have no idea.
Good question. Right, that's a really tough one. I mean, the reason why it's tough is because You know, the market has to be there to support development, and if there's no market to do that, it's kind of hard to, I mean, it's like that's a difficult thing. So, I mean, one of the things that I think we're trying to do in certain smaller towns around New Jersey, for example, is again going back to this predictability thing and making sure that everything is in place in terms of legislation, regulation, and incentives, whatever you can possibly do, so that if there is an inkling of market, you can attract that market to these places, right? It's a little bit easier, obviously, if the city owns the land, because you can, do an RFP and do it well and attract the right kind of developer. But on privately owned pieces of land, it's a little different. We're working in this. The other thing about privately owned pieces of land is that the landowner, you're kind of it's up to the whims of the landowner, right? And so lots of times the landowner, I've seen this more than once. For some reason, these landowners that are like 80-year-olds that have had it forever and they got it for nothing always think that they're sitting on a gold mine, even though the gold never materializes, right? And so I don't have a very good answer for that, actually.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, just a couple of things. One thing that Washington, D.C. does is we have a pretty steep tax on vacant properties.
Yeah.
So that it becomes actually costly to hold on. And so you'd better hope that gold appears, because it isn't no cost to the community to have a blighted property sitting in the middle of the community. It does create impacts on surrounding property owners and on, obviously, the city's tax base. The other thing that actually your colleague told me about yesterday was that some places have development rights that expire in a certain amount of time. So if I have 3 years in which I have a fair amount of density available to me to put on, it limits the speculation. As I near the end of that clock, I'm going to get nervous about having to go back through the process and seeing whether I can get a development on there or not.
But that requires a transaction, that initial transaction, to have occurred within a time frame that that legislation can be put in place, right? So if you have a landowner that holds property for 20 years, like, you can't really go in and apply those tools necessarily.
Well, you can certainly change the tax rate for vacant properties at any time, and I believe Maryland, when Governor Glendening was governor, was looking at sunsetting different development rights. Mm-hmm. I don't know if they...
In New York, I don't think we'd have that authority, but we do have a vacant property registration program here, and it's a fee, but the fee has to be kind of commensurate with legitimate expenses that the city incurs. So I know that there are other programs where they ratcheted up the fee for every successive year it was vacant. We can't do that unless the municipality can show that you've actually incurred additional cost. One thing I will mention is the Brownfield Opportunity Area Program, and maybe Paul Byer left, right? Okay. But that is an opportunity where you can maybe work with an entire area, neighborhood area, that has a lot of suspected brownfield sites or underutilized sites, vacant sites. And through that long process, it's 3 steps. You can actually work with the landowners or the property owners, pull them in, do the community visioning so that the redevelopment of that site isn't just isolated in a vacuum, but it's actually done within a much larger neighborhood area. The city has 3 of those BOAs ongoing, and the county administers one at the Brandywine, and they also have one over in Johnson City, the EJ Spine. So there's, again, a lot of great activity going on in that area that's already existing, and we hope to take advantage of those in the coming years.
That actually made me want to talk just a little briefly about, because another method that seems to be working in Newark is more of a grassroots effort, right? Where there's a community development corporation that's in this neighborhood where this sort of blighted, underused property exists, and they went and found resources to hire a planner, us, to conduct a community visioning process to imagine the redevelopment and reuse of that site. And so that way, what happened then is we developed we did some financial feasibility on how that site could be redeveloped, and we created a really interesting visual presentation for what could happen. We also garnered the resources of the community itself to imagine interim uses on the site that wouldn't cost the existing property owner anything, but would actually start, so for like markets, we might even do a little bit of urban agriculture on the site. It doesn't cost the owner anything. If the owner doesn't have any risk on it, he's like, fine, whatever. And it starts to develop and generate some buzz around the site. And then, you know, the other piece of this is we then go to the landowner with an actual proposal for how he might redevelop the site, right? Lots of times I don't think these landowners actually have, first of all, you know, if they're getting a lot of passive income off of the thing, there's really no incentive for them to do anything creative or thoughtful about it, right? So if you can bring them something that says, hey, look, your property is underperforming economically in addition to being a really bad thing for this community. And if we do a few things that are very low risk that could increase your income, why wouldn't you do that? You know, so that's more of a grassroots thing.
I want to transition there to a question. I mean, a lot of this has been talking about kind of paradigm shifts and how we invest our transportation dollars, our land use, our zoning regs, but still what I don't think hasn't been mentioned much really is economic development paradigm. And that the traditional old way of doing it is to basically lure a business from somewhere else, either in the region or outside the region, to that area, not creating overall economic vitality in the nation, but just stealing jobs. Then there's the idea of clustering, but also what role of just growing your own, you know, economic gardening, localism. If they're the majority of our job, or source of our jobs that are created, how does a municipality change that shift? How can does an IDA play a role in that? Some of our other traditional economic development tools, can they shift to assist this localism?
I want to jump in there because there's going to be an opportunity here in this region that's brought about by Governor Cuomo's announcement. There'll be regional economic development councils. And while we're all waiting to see how that actually rolls out, presumably at some point, maybe in the next month or two, Lieutenant Governor Duffy will announce a meeting somewhere in this area in Broome County, Madison, somewhere around here. We're not sure exactly how the regions include Binghamton and Broome. And I think that's the time when people here in Binghamton need to let the Lieutenant Governor know that you'd rather see the effort go to retention of existing jobs and supporting local efforts that grow organically and grow naturally here in this community. But particularly, you don't want to see IDAs, which use public funds, moving companies from Binghamton to Greenfield, somewhere between Binghamton and God knows where. That's not the best use of the funds. It's cannibalization. And I think that there are a lot of economic development tax credit programs used in the state that should be told, yeah, you can give a subsidy to a company in a greenfield, but it's going to be a lot less than the subsidy you would give to a company in a brownfield. And if that brownfield is a parcel right near downtown, that's where the greatest subsidy is allowed. So a differential rate of subsidization. I think that when Lieutenant Governor Duffy comes here and the ESDC comes talking about regional economic development councils, assert what's in the interest of the density and the needs of this community, if that's how you see it.
Exactly. We've got a long way to go on that, I think, and it's refreshing. The governor's refreshing on this front with the councils. Lieutenant Governor Duffy, and even Ken Adams, I think Ken Adams, who's now in charge of ESDC, formerly in charge of the Business Council, recognizes that inefficiency. And Paul and I lived through that with Beechnut moving to Florida, but Florida in, is it Madison County? I think near Amsterdam. If you drive down the thruway to Albany now, you'll see the empty Beechnut facility in Canajoharie. And they're bankrupting Canajoharie by that move, which kept Beechnut in New York, which was very important to the Empire State Development Corporation. But at the time they did that, there was absolutely no plan on what they were going to do to support Canajoharie when that facility moved out. And we were all called into the governor's office to triage that after the decision had been made and after the announcement had been made. And the mayor called up and said, well, guys, what about us? We just upgraded our wastewater treatment plant to support Beechnut for another 20 years, and they owed the corporation that I worked for $4 million to pay for it. So we still have some very problematic approaches to this. And as I mentioned, my portfolio, having just about everything I needed to be a really cool, smart guy in Onondaga County, the one I'm missing is economic development. and they're still very much out there in a different plane, working with IDAs and giving those incentives to steal from Peter to pay Paul however they can. But we're very fortunate to have a great organic, local Center State CEO that's done a tremendous job growing businesses, and we are fighting to retain our businesses, particularly our big ones. Like Binghamton with IBM, we had Carrier Corporation. They're gone, so it's a new paradigm, and Canajoharie is a very sad story.
To leave a positive note on that, we have an example of how investing and supporting our local entrepreneurs. We have a representative from VMR here, who's New York State Small Business of the Year recipient, and so went from a few jobs in their basement to almost 300 jobs now here in the city of Binghamton, North Side. It's just an incredible effort. So really the power is in cultivating local innovation, supporting our locally independent-owned businesses.
Just one quick comment on that. I mean, just from a physical standpoint, I think your comment about starting in the basement speaks to cheap space. And the availability of cheap space where, different startups, just basic incubator space, I think that is also something that can be pretty powerful in helping locals start up. Access to, a lot of the economic development also tends to sort of focus on the brass ring of medium or large size businesses. I think just more of a focus on the small businesses, the startups, helping them with business plans, with incubator space, getting in touch with other folks, providing some common back office even for some of them. Those are the kinds of things that might help to home grow more businesses so that they do become hundreds of jobs rather than 3 or 4 in a basement.
Right. And Broome County does have an incubator, so it has been very helpful in that. I just got one that it was specific to the smart growth, and since Paul is gone, I'm going to maybe hold on to this. Maybe we can talk afterwards with Peter to see. Maybe one last question here. Before we do that, we'll finish a little early because it has been a long day, and there is wine and beer next door, so I must be getting really boring. I just want to say a few things, a little housekeeping before the last question. One, videos, all of these will be online. Definitely want to thank Wilton and Stefan. They agreed to do this at a highly discounted rate just because they're very committed. So. The wine networking reception is happening right out here. They basically said use the space until you're done talking. So there's no rush. Feel free to relax. We will send a survey to all of the attendees at today's symposium. It will literally take 5 minutes. We did sample. And basically, it's very helpful to get your feedback so the LCA can really figure out what are the next steps. How do we move from an informal alliance to maybe institutionalizing it, taking advantage of really some of our regional planning boards? And finally, in the spirit of sustainability, please, Amelia would kill me if I forgot to say this, please drop off your badges when you leave at the registration table. We will reuse the plastic, okay? And then finally, can we just give a really warm applause to all of our panelists who we nagged them with emails and phone calls. Some of them really agreed to some challenging travel arrangements, so we appreciate you coming. Last question, just because I think this really speaks to future vision and how we need to make sure we're making the right choices or balanced choices. Given that in Broome County there has been an out-migration of 30 and 40-year-olds due to the lack of jobs, we are left with a senior citizenry baby boomer majority. Shouldn't we be concentrating on senior citizen housing rather than student housing downtown? There are 3 big student housing projects going on downtown, so someone maybe want to tackle that one. Planner at the table?
I don't think they're necessarily mutually exclusive as long as they're not restrictive in their rentals. I think they're very similar housing types, actually. They want walkable communities, they want services nearby, they want access to entertainment, they want access to culture. I don't think it's, as long as it's not exclusive housing, I don't think it's an issue, really. I think they could be very complementary.
I think it was a good question to finish with, because I also think it reflects that, we still need a lot of work. We have to do a lot of advocacy so we can make the right forms. We might have missed the opportunity at the city to use the tax pilot as a leverage, maybe to incentivize inclusionary zoning, make sure we have affordable housing, that it doesn't have to be just student housing. But there are a lot of different creative tools. If we're going to use the public resources, invest in our community, we want to make sure that we get the greatest return. With that being said, I want to thank Mary McFadden for doing an excellent job emceeing. And if anyone is interested in learning more about the LCA, feel free to stop over, talk to any of us. We'd be happy to talk to you. And thank you all for coming. It's been a long day, but really appreciate your attention and commitment.